Welcome to the Horror Hangout, a podcast where film fans watch the best and worst horror movies of all time and talk about them. Today's episode is a bonus episode chatting all about a recently released book, all about modern horror movies. My name is Ben Errington. Today I'm joined by a very special guest. Clark Collis is the author of Screaming and Conjuring, The Resurrection and Unstoppable Rise of the Modern Horror Movie, which has been called the definitive 500-page history of the modern horror film. Welcome to the show, Clark. Hello.
Ben, thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure.
You're very, very welcome. Thanks for joining us and congratulations on the book.
Thank you. It's funny when you sort of think of an idea for a book and have the word the conjure or conjuring in the title, and then accidentally it comes out the same week as The Conjuring Last
Oh my
Rites.
God, was that accidental? Because when that book came out, I thought, oh, perfect. They've released the book the exact same week as the new film coming out. That wasn't on purpose?
No, I don't know. No, it wasn't. I mean, because we wanted to bring it out if you've got a horror book coming out, it makes sense for it to come out in September, because then
Yeah.
you've got like the run up to Halloween. No, I don't think when we first started talking about the book and when I came up with the title, I honestly don't. I wouldn't swear to it, but I'm pretty sure that we had no idea that The Conjuring Last Rites would be coming out then, nor in fact that the next Scream movie would be on track to be released in January. So, you know.
Absolutely perfect. Perfect timing, perfect marketing. Amazing. Before we get into it, let me just quickly read out some details on the book just so our audiences are familiar. Blockbuster box office, critical acclaim and Oscars recognition from Get Out and Weapons to Substance and Sinners. The horror genre is enjoying a glorious and gory golden age. Screaming and Conjuring details the films and frights that led to this extraordinary renaissance, from the release of the groundbreaking Scream in 1996 to the arrival of 2013's The Conjuring, which spawned a multi-billion-dollar franchise. Is that kind of that's it in a nutshell, but is that the kind of the years we're looking at from 1996 but right up to now?
Ben, first off, that sounds like a fantastic book that I'd advise everybody to go out and buy.
This book sounds
Immediately.
great. I don't
The,
know about
the
you. This sounds perfect. I need this book in my life.
the bulk of the book, so the book starts in 1996 with the release of the first Scream. Although I do provide some sort of background context talking about, the history of horror, and in particular, sort of the history of the slasher movies of the 80s. And how the first half of the 90s, while it did have some notable horror movies, was a comparative desert compared to what had gone before. So it starts with Scream, and then discusses really a lot of horror movies and a lot of waves of horror movies from 1996 right up to 2013 with the release of the first Conjuring film. And then there's a final chapter where I kind of at pace go through the last 10 years, really. And it's funny that we were writing at the start of the year, we were writing the copy for the book and saying that yes, it does go up to Sinners and so forth, but it is that thing where you're like, wow, if all of these movies bomb this year, then this book is going to seem less relevant, a little bit sort of
Yeah.
less important, and then one by one, all of the horror films
Oh my God.
have either met or vastly exceeded their expectations, from Sinners 28 years later, Final Destination Bloodlines, which is still the most fun I've had at the cinema this year,
Yeah, yeah, it was
right
good
up
fun.
to The Conjuring Last Rites.
Yeah, and you've seen that as well. You've seen The Conjuring Last
Yeah,
Rites?
yeah, I saw that I was lucky enough to be invited to a screening uh, last week, and I thought it was, I think the first Conjuring movie is just fantastic, and I do think it's something of a masterpiece. And the second one's good, and I do like The Nun, because I think it is very different from. It's like,
Mm.
hey, let's do a movie that really is not connected to the Conjuring franchise. Is set during in a spooky castle in Transylvania. Um, and I have the pleasure of knowing the director Corin Hardy a little bit.
Wow,
And
okay.
the most recent Conjuring film, it's fine. You kind of, I've seen all of these films and some of them quite a lot.
Mm.
So there is an element of certainly familiarity to the most recent Conjuring film. But if you've seen it, you know that at the end there is a sort of nice curtain call on the whole franchise, as
Yeah.
if it was the last in the series. But I suspect now, regardless of whether the stars come back or not, I mean, this
Yeah.
franchise is going to go on and on, I
I
imagine.
think potentially. So we did an episode review just recently about the film, and I think after mere minutes after that, well maybe not minutes, maybe hours, a TV show I think was
Yeah,
kind of announced, and now you've kind of got these two younger characters as well, so you can almost do um a series carrying on with those two,
yeah.
even if they those two didn't necessarily do the things Ed and Lorraine Warren did in real life.
I
Yeah.
w- it was also. I mean, I should say. I mean, I'm damning it with faint praise a little bit. Faint praise a little bit. I will admit there were a couple of times in the film where I physically jumped in my seat from a shock. Which I mean, they can still Michael Chavez, who directed this film, and James
Mm.
Wan, who is obviously producing it. They do know how to scare people. But what was really weird is that when the first Conjuring film came out, I did I visited Lorraine Warren, who is then still alive, at her house in Monroe, Connecticut. And I've been in
Wow.
the sort of basement museum where they keep Annabelle. Uh, and I mean, I met Lorraine, who's no longer with us, but I also met her son-in-law, Tony Sparrow, who is a large part
Of
of the new
course.
film. So I've met some of those folks, but then I've also I went on the set of, I think it was Annabelle Comes Home,
Mm.
and interviewed Patrick Wilson and interviewed Vera Farmiga and the gentleman who plays the priest in all of those films, whose name escapes me at the moment. Sorry.
Mm.
And so the weird thing is watching this film, the Conjuring Last Rites. Like on the one hand, there's been for some reason this time around there's been a lot of stories, actually one of which is written by me, saying probably this is all a load of made up
Yeah.
hooey.
Yeah.
Um, but also, I mean, it's obviously, I mean, it's a strange thing where it's both uh, possibly fake, but also, to my mind, very real, because I have met the people who are being
Of
depicted
course.
and the people depicting them. So it was this weird kind of overlay of memories as I was watching it, I have to
Yeah.
say.
How much did those experiences influence your writing of this book? Were they very key to the writing of certain chapters of this book?
Not really, because I didn't want to make it like, I mean, they were key to the extent that I had done a lot of research about
Hmm.
the story of The Conjuring. And I actually spoke, if you remember the original Conjuring, sorry, I keep on saying, in Britain they say Conjuring. I'm British, but I've spent a lot of time in America. And in Britain
Yeah.
they say Conjuring, and in America they say Conjuring. And
Conjuring, yeah.
if you were to say to an American, "Oh, I'm off to see The Conjuring Last Rites," they would be like, "I've no idea what you're saying. What do you say? What do you
What's
mean?"
this?
I'm like, I'm off to the cinema to see The Conjuring Last Rites. And they were like, I don't know. But if you say, oh right, okay, it's The Conjuring Last Rites, they'd be like, oh yeah, I know what that is. It's this
Yeah.
weird sort of, it's such a tiny difference. So excuse me if I go from one to two.
It's fine.
Next time maybe I'll write a book whose title I can pronounce the same way
Yeah.
in all the English language territories. But sorry, I forgot what I was saying about
Yeah.
Oh, yes, the experiences. It was
Yeah.
very, yeah, it was very helpful in the extent that I had, over time, interviewed James Wan, interviewed Patrick Wilson, interviewed Vera Farmiga, interviewed Peter Safran, one of the producers of the Conjuring franchise, who is now with James Gunn, the head of like DC,
Wow,
DC
okay.
Films.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so I had all that information, and then for the book, I interviewed a lot of people for the book, but particularly for the Conjuring films, I interviewed Joseph Bishara, who has this fascinating career where he often gets asked by James Wan to do the music for his films uh, and to play the monster. So it's this
All
weird
right.
monster role he has. So he plays like the lipstick face, the lipstick demon in the Insidious movies, and did the music for it. And in the Conjuring movies, he plays He definitely plays the Bathsheba, the sort of witch ghost in the first Conjuring, and then does the music as well. It's a pretty. You look up his IMDb or Wikipedia page. It's pretty fascinating.
That's an
So I have this
interesting.
information, but what I didn't. It isn't sort of a book where it's about me going on set. You know, it's not like it's not like my personal history of horror. I mean, I've had the
Sure.
great pleasure of um an honor really of well, it's just such a treat that I mean I worked for Entertainment Weekly in America for 20 odd years, got to visit lots of sets, meet lots of people, both in front and behind the camera, but this isn't really one of those books where it's like, oh, and this is what it was like visiting the set
Sure.
of
Sure.
the first of David Gordon Green's Halloween, although that was a pretty, I mean, to be in a room
Wow.
where Jamie Lee Curtis is dressed as Laurie Strode, being
Yeah.
Laurie Strode, and then to talk about her afterwards. I mean, that's pretty exciting, but it's not really that kind of book. So I didn't sort of inject myself into proceedings.
Sure.
Uh,
Sure.
in the course
Was
of
the idea always to write about multiple films? Because obviously your last book, You Got Red on You, which is obviously just about Shaun of the Dead and the making of that particular film.
my-
Were you tempted? Did this idea kind of come about as I'm going to write about just one film and then sort of become more, or was it always supposed to be about a particular sort of trend of films from decade to decade?
Yeah, it kind of sprung from when I was writing Shaun of the Dead, because the Shaun of the Dead book, because there are some films that are made completely in some films that are made and then sort of marketed completely in isolation from other films, which indeed, I mean, that's most story of most films. But Shaun of the Dead was interesting because it has links to so many other films and filmmakers. So it's obviously set in the world of uh, George A. Romero's, it follows the George A. Romero rules. It is set in his universe. And then Edgar Wright, the director, and Simon Pegg, the co-writer and star, showed it, or had got arranged for it to be shown to George A. Romero to get his seal of approval. And in fact, Edgar always tells this great story about George A. Romero was in Florida where he lived at the time, and so they rented a little cinema. And I guess those days sent a physical print down to Florida from London. And so George A. Romero watched it, but he watched it in the company of a security guard, which Universal Pictures had employed to make sure that
Oh
George
right.
A. Romero didn't pirate it with
Oh my
his,
God.
I guess it would be his 2003 camera. Um, and Edgar always says that it's hard to think that George A. Romero would pirate the film. And if he did, like, no one would deserve to make money off Shaun of the
Yeah,
Dead more than George A. Romero. So
absolutely.
having got George A. Romero's approval and sort of put it on the British poster, then they thought, Edgar particularly, well, let's see if we can get blurbs from other horror filmmakers or filmmakers well known to horror cinema goers or other horror figures. And so they approached and got blurbs from Stephen King, Peter Jackson, uh, who else? Robert Rodriguez, Quentin Tarantino, and a couple of other people, and then put that on the poster for the American release. And then Edgar became friends with Eli Roth. And in fact, when Simon and Edgar publicized, they did a panel at Comic Con in, I think, 2004. And Edgar asked Eli Roth to come down and be like a heckler in the crowd. And so halfway
All
through
right.
the panel, Eli Roth stands up and starts like shouting that they've ripped off Dawn of the Dead, George A. Romero's Dawn of the Dead, and is kind of like escorted from the room. And then when they do a kind of premiere at the ArcLight in LA, the legendary special makeup effects artist Greg Nicotero comes down and does zombie makeups on people,
Mm.
including Eli Roth. Uh, attending the screening. So when I was writing, I mean, this is all, I mean, to me, this is, all fascinating stuff. And then, of course, Edgar is one of the people asked by Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez to contribute a fake trailer to Grindhouse.
Mm.
And so Edgar very quickly becomes, reaches out and becomes part of this sort of like horror, sort of loose scene of horror filmmakers. And writing the book, I was certainly when it came to the release in detailing the release in America, I kept on thinking, wow, like Eli Roth's story is really interesting too, and like Greg Nicotero is a fascinating
Mm.
person. And I'm sort of fascinated by Quentin Tarantino outside of Grindhouse, and even I'm not even sure his Grindhouse contribution could be described as horror. I guess it is, but like um, Quentin's very interested in horror, and there are just all of these sort of people around that kind of had a small role to play in the story of Shaun of the Dead, but
Mm.
had their own stories and a bigger role to play in the history of horror at the time. And I just sort of like you know, I mean, when I was writing the Shaun of the Dead book, I was very, very concentrated on Shaun of the Dead. But as the sort of the camera pans back, you start to see how it's part of this, uh, story really that I think
Mm.
you can say starts in 1996 and really, is carrying on today. And there are all these filmmakers that are, collaborating or inspiring each other, or even inspiring each other negatively. But it very much does seem like a uh, a story that can be told, and sort of from a perspective of like 30, like 20 years, you can see how various different sort of movements of horror arrived and scared a lot of people and made a lot of money. And then one day you woke up and like a completely different wave of horror had turned up.
Yeah, yeah, of course. I mean, we've gone through lived through so many different eras of horror. And you say about sort of flashing through the last 10 years. Um, what would you call this era of horror that we're in right now? Yeah, and do you sort of discuss that? Can you see anything when you say about sort of like panning out and looking at where we are in terms of the genre? What do you think? What would you call this particular genre? Have you got a
Well,
name for it?
I mean, I don't really have an answer. I mean, that's a fascinating question. It's funny. Well, I mean, I've interviewed, as an entertainment journalist, I've interviewed, thousands of people probably. And when anybody says "great question" to, after being asked a question, that means they don't have an answer.
Yeah, okay.
Nothing ever interesting follows somebody saying "great
Great
question."
question.
But that is a great question. And I don't, but the thing is, I think it's just very hard to tell when you're in it. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Like I can tell you exactly what was going on in the horror scene in like 2003. It was this moment where, you know, everybody had had enough of teen slasher films. And that's when, Rob Zombie and Eli Roth, uh, sort of and other and James Wan and these filmmakers that wanted to do something tougher turned up, and that's how you get the wave of what became known as torture porn. I'm not a huge fan of that phrase, but it's very hard when you're in it to
Mm.
know
Yeah.
like what's going on. And I think like I was thinking about Sinners really, which is a huge. It's like it's hugely important film, but how important is it to horror? And it's just I think it's going to take like 10 years to it'll take 10 years to know whether it's like just some crazy one-off or
Mm.
does it sort of open up are we going to be into vampire movies for the next 10 years, or are we going to be into hugely talented people given vast budgets to bugger off and make whatever horror movie they want for the next 10 years, or it's really hard to tell. Funny enough, I'm happy to admit this. I don't mind this because, and this may seem like an odd comparison to make or an odd place to sort of seek inspiration, but one of the many, I mean, when I wrote for Entertainment Weekly in America, I covered a lot of horror, but I also covered a whole lot of other things, particularly British things. And one of my beats, as they called it, was The Crown. Basically, because I knew who the royal family, like I could name and recognize all the members of the royal family, having not because I'm a royalist, but just having grown up here.
Yeah.
Um, and I remember interviewing Peter Morgan, who's the creator of The Crown. I think this was like for season three. And I said, well, how recent are you going to get with this thing?
Mm.
Because you're going to get into Meghan territory and he said no because he said he was gonna stop sort of 12 and 15 years before the present day, which is what he did in the
Mm,
end, because he said like anything anything further back than 12 years is history, but the most recent decade is like journalism. That's
mm,
the difference between them. And I think part of what he meant was it's just very hard to, things have not been sorted out. They have not been settled.
mm,
Um, but one thing that's interesting, and one of the reasons I wanted to write this book is the one thing you can say is that so many of the franchises which were created during the period that I cover in the book are still like up and running or have
mm.
come back in a big way. I mean, I mentioned it earlier, but 28 weekdays later franchise was created during the period in the book. Final Destination, Bloodlines,
Hmm.
Saw is still going, Insidious is still going, The Conjuring is still going, Scream is still going. They had a go at continuing. I know what you did last summer. It's all final. Yes,
Yeah.
I said Final Destination. It's just over and over again. They're doing a Hostel TV show now, reportedly with
Yeah,
Paul
I think I saw
Giamatti.
that. Yeah.
It's like all of that stuff is up and running and has kind of replaced the franchises that we, grew or certainly I grew up with loving
Mm,
during the 80s. It hasn't been a Friday. I know there's supposed to be a Friday the 13th TV show, but that's sort of gone. Nightmare on
yeah.
Elm Street. I mean, I guess Halloween has been revived and has come back, but it's crazy how there was a period where, like 2 years ago, when there were three James Wan. There was three films from movies from franchises that James Wan had created that came out very quickly to one another, like Saw X, and then there was a
Mm,
Conjuring movie, and then there was what was it, Insidious: The Red Door.
yeah.
Uh, so it's just fascinating. I mean, it's good for the book and it gives it a sort of contemporary edge, hopefully. But it's fascinating how so many of those franchises from the roughly from the aughts are still like
Yeah.
absolute box off behemoths.
I totally agree with you that you can't really see you can't really see the state of the genre until the time has passed, I guess. It does feel like it's a combination of like legacy sequels and then just like really great original films from sort of like these new voices in horror. And it
Yeah.
almost feels like some of these new voices in horror are almost like one or two and then done, and then they move on to a different genre. Ari Aster, like for example. Or someone like Ryan Coogler obviously hasn't made his name in horror, but then suddenly decides I'm gonna have a go at this big, huge original idea. So yeah, I think we're in a great. Been a great turn of events, and I like happy to see it continue. Do you have a particular favorite of 2025 so far?
Uh, I, as I said earlier, the most I was privileged enough to go to a preview screening of Final Destination Bloodlines
Mm.
that I wasn't that excited for, really. I was fine. I know it had been the franchise had been away for a long time. I was interested to see what was going on. I wouldn't say it was a horror movie I was particularly looking forward to, and then it was just one of those things where it just felt so right. It was at a preview screening in the West End, huge screen, capacity crowd, two free beers before the thing started.
Two
Me and my
free beers. Oh my God,
me
nice
and my
one.
friend did the thing where he went to get some beers and then I went to get some beers. Um, and I just thought it was amazing. I mean, I just had so much fun. I had absolutely so much fun seeing that. And then actually, I had an interesting experience going to see 28 years later, which I was very excited about. I was
Yeah,
very excited about
me
that.
too.
And then I loved the first hour. And then the second hour, it just sort of sat uncomfortably with me a little. Like it just wasn't what I wanted, the second hour. And then the end I found sort of weird and confusing. And so, I was sort of like, well, that was an hour of what I wanted and an hour of some stuff I didn't really want. Then I kind of thought about it for 48 hours and I didn't go and see it again. But after 48 hours, I'd sort of concluded that the problem was with me and not with the film. You know what I mean? And the problem was my desire to watch the same movie again.
Yeah.
What they were giving me was a slightly different movie. And So I kind of came around to it, and now I'm pretty excited for Bone Temple.
Bone Temple, yeah. I mean, I guess it's good that people can realize the problem might lie with them than the film. I think a lot of horror fans don't necessarily ever know that. I'm definitely guilty of being like that, and I think I felt similar to you with 28 years later. That ending, I'm still not. It still hasn't sat with me quite right, and seeing these characters in a different context in the trailer for the Bone Temple still hasn't fully convinced me. But I guess we'll see what happens.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm very excited about it. And what else was? Oh, and Weapons. I did think like I mean, Weapons was a movie that did I see it on the? I think I saw it on the Thursday. It came out, and I was like,
Mm.
because I knew it would be ruined for me if as someone who listens to quite a lot of movie podcasts. I knew I had to see it that Thursday, otherwise I would sort of ruin it for
Yeah,
myself.
I felt the same.
And I thought that certainly the first hour of that it was like, oh my God, this is just like the best, in some ways, the best Stephen King movie ever. And I don't mean that as any kind of slam on Zach Cregger. But I was like, this is amazing. And then, I mean, there are just some stories I think that inevitably once the once things start to fall into place, once you start understanding what's going on,
Mm.
then you're like inevitably, oh, all right, well, this isn't quite so much fun. But I mean, I had a lot of fun, I have to say, watching that movie. I thought that was,
Yeah, yeah. Me
yeah,
too.
horror is, but I just can't believe my luck that the premise of the book really, especially in the last chapter, is is like horror's bigger than ever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's because in the very early stages of reading about, I don't know if you remember, but last spring, not like spring of 2024, there was like a clutch of horror movies that sort of underperformed at the box office,
Mm.
particularly Abigail, that vampire film.
Yeah.
And then there was the religious horror movie with Sydney Sweeney, which didn't do that
Oh, yeah.
well.
Immaculate, is that what it's called?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then the first Omen, they all sort of made some money, but and I was like, oh wow, I'm just starting to write a book about, you know, as it says in the title, the unstoppable rise of horror, and I'm worried that it's going to be stopped by the time that
Yeah.
and I can't believe my luck that far from being stopped, it really is now one of the very few things that sort of grown up people
Mm.
uh will go and see at the cinema, for which I'm
Absolutely. Yeah.
delighted.
Absolutely. What a time to be alive. Can we talk a little bit about, I guess, the book design? Because I understand there's a limited edition run of the first, is it 500 or 5,000?
5,000.
5,000, right? Okay, add an extra zero onto there.
Yeah.
And this was another thing that sold me, as love seeing books like this on the shelf. But obviously, it's a hardcover with the sort of foil edging and the spot varnish cover and everything like that. And of course, can we talk about the illustration on the front as well? Was that
Yeah.
was that something that you were involved in the process of sort of coming up with, or?
I mean, to say I was involved would be, I was
Okay.
very, I'm embarrassed to say that I was in any way involved with it because I love it so much and really had nothing to do with it. The illustration is by Gary Pullin, Pullin, aka Ghoulish Gary, who has just done over the years so many like horror um, DVD covers and sort of alternative posters, and he's just done um, the covers for a lot of Stephen King paperback
Mm.
reissues. And if you Google Gary Pullen or look at his website, you'll probably realize that half of the horror things that you've seen over the past decade have been done by him. My publisher Matthew at 1984 Publishing. I mean, all of the books that he published are really beautiful. I'm an egomaniacal writer, so I think you could basically just print up uh, my books on A4 paper and staple them together, and then people
Yeah.
will be so wowed by my writing. You don't need any of this. But Matthew assures me that it's very much not the case. But he's also more seriously just, he's absolutely, in the best way, a fanatic for, getting the book looking right and looking terrific. And we had my contribution to the honestly, my memory is so Gary Pullen was nice enough to say, that he would do our cover.
Mm.
Matthew and Gary and I had a Zoom meeting, and my memory is that I said, "Yeah, the cover should be horror but cool." I think that was my
Yeah,
pitch,
yeah,
which is a terrible pitch because if you've ever been at any kind of meeting sort of involved in the marketing of anything, you'll know that there's a point where even if it's like washing powder, someone goes, "Yeah, but cool, but cool, right? We want it to look cool." No one says, "We want this thing to look uncool." So in a sense, I was just saying, "Oh, I would like uh the cover of this book to be, horror-y. The cover of this horror book should be horror-y." But anyway, then Gary came back and it was sort of three designs, and we liked this the best, the one
Mm.
that's on the cover the best, and then he went off and did a finished job. And I really like it because I think it leaps out at you, and
Yeah,
also you can't really tell if the person is male or female. The person, and it's a screaming face essentially.
yeah.
You can't tell whether they're male or female. You can't really tell whether they're screaming or laughing, and you can't sort of tell whether they're like the victim or the victimizer, I guess.
Mm.
And I just thought it was perfect. I thought it was
It's a
absolutely
kind of
great.
book if you
I'm
see.
also a bit concerned that people might not want to take it out on the tube
I
to
was
read.
literally just about to say exactly the same thing. You read my mind, Clark. I was about to say this is the kind of book you see people reading on the tube. For me, if I saw someone reading this on the tube, I'm like, that's it. I want to be that
Sure.
person's friend. Not that I make a habit of approaching people and randomly striking out conversations, but still, I feel like if I saw this book, I'd be able to say, I interviewed Clark recently, and and he's a lovely guy, and
You go.
he definitely came up with the idea for that cover.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, it's not. I will say it's a huge. I mean, it is a physically huge book, so I'm not sure. There are easier books. I don't want to put off
Yeah,
anybody. There are easier books to carry around if you want
we've
to read it on the
we've all
tube.
seen some people bring out massive books out of nowhere on the tube, haven't we? And we've gone like, can you not be reading that somewhere else? Reading that at home? It's like about like six, like £10 a book right there. Jesus. Can we talk at all about what you might be working on currently or next, or is everything under wraps? Or
Not really. It is a bit under wraps, to be honest with you.
okay,
Mostly because I don't know. I've got some ideas, and I'm talking to some people, but I don't want to jinx it. And also, the people that I might be writing about don't currently know that I'm going to be writing about them.
I
And
see.
then sometimes, I mean, sometimes I'm knee deep in research on another project, but earlier this year I was knee deep in research on a different project that I decided not to do or to put on the shelf or um, so yeah, I don't really. I mean, I'm hoping it was a real pleasure sort of getting a second book out. I think a lot of people, I mean, a lot of people only ever make one film, and a lot of people only ever write one book, and so it was very
Yeah.
nice to sort of get over that hump. Um, and I hope to write a third, but we'll see. It's all good
Hmm.
regardless. It's just great to have this book out, and people have been very nice and seem to have enjoyed it, and I
Yeah.
really appreciate people taking the time to talk to me about it.
People seem to be absolutely loving it, and so is the best place to get it from the 1984 directly from the 1984 website.
Ye- Uh, I'm only pausing. I mean, generally speaking, yes, I'm kind of pausing about whether that's the case if you live in the UK.
Ah, yeah.
But there's plenty of places that you can get. I think Forbidden Planet have it in London.
Oh, lovely.
And yeah, I don't know what the postage and packing situation.
Hmm.
I can. Sorry, I'm just laughing because if Matthew hears this, he'd be like, "No," or like, "I told you 100 times you should say this." My publisher.
Well, you got to
But,
think about your UK audiences as well,
yeah.
seeing as you're
Yeah,
from the
I mean,
UK.
yeah, check out how much it is from 1984, and then but maybe there's cheaper British because 1984 is based in the US.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
Maybe
Oh,
there's cheap options. The important thing really is that people buy. one copy for themselves and then several for their families for Halloween or Christmas. Really.
Exactly, for Halloween and Christmas. You know, it's the gift that covers all holidays, I
You don't
believe.
even need to think about it. Just buy six of them, and
Buy six of them. You're gonna have six. You're gonna have five or six friends that want a copy.
yes,
Um,
sure.
I'll put links in the show notes, of course, just so our audiences can find the book and then purchase a copy. But thank you so much for taking the time, Clark. It's been an absolute pleasure. Great to meet you and great to chat about your book. And yeah, congratulations again.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks very much. See you very soon. Take care.